Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
This is one of those things that we often take for granted when we're driving down the highway, freeway, road, that things are safe with the other vehicles, especially those transporting things. How is that governed? How is that regulated? This guy has made it his life's work to make sure that these things are safe. And as a matter of fact, he's worked as a safety investigator for many years, has trained both law enforcement and motor carriers on all different types of DOT topics. And he's got a company that does just that. So if you're somebody that does transport, motor carrying, all of that, he can help you out with that. And this is Safety First with Matt Freeman. Matt, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve. This is doing really well. Been crazy busy, but making time to do this, and I'm looking forward to see what happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people watch, a lot of people listen, whether you are somebody who has a company that does transportation or not. Just this is fascinating to learn what's going out there on the roadways. So why don't we get right into it? What do states do to adopt the federal regulations when it comes to motor carriers? I know they have to adhere to, starts at the top, if you will. So how is that all done?
Sure. Yeah. That's a big question we used to always get, what regulations fall in the states. So a lot of states, they've had their own regulations built into their state statutes. But as far as I know, all the states in the country have adopted either all of the federal regulations or some part of the federal regulations into their state statutes and how they abide by their motor carrier laws. Usually it starts with a state statute per state to adopt, so they may adopt the entire set of regulations and not worry about creating their own state regulations, or they may adopt parts of the regulations. Okay. In order to do that, they got to put that through their administrative regulations, their administrative department, basically who handles the laws and regulations of the state. That will decide who will govern that. So if it usually goes to like your state highway patrols, your DOT departments. It just depends on where the state, once they adopt those regulations, they put those in written law. They'll push those out to whichever department they want to do it. It's always usually going to be some type of your DOT, your law enforcement departments. You're going to be doing your scale houses, your roadside, your everyday troopers, depending on what they do. They set up different setups. Normally you'll have like your roadside, it does commercial enforcement only to regulate those laws that they've adopted, or they will also have maybe their own division that does it. Just for example, to give you kind of how it works, like state of Missouri, they do both. They have highway patrolmen, they call them CVETs, commercial vehicle enforcement troopers, who can stop a everyday vehicle and a commercial vehicle. That's how they were trained. They also have a division where that's all they do. They can't stop regular vehicles, but they'll stop your truck. Okay, so it just depends on how the state goes about it. Another example, as far as doing like internal investigations, like with the state of Missouri, I'm just using Missouri as an example. That's where I came from at one time. They will have a division. That's all they do. They do all the internal. They don't do roadside, but they do all the internal investigations, all the compliance reviews, focus reviews, anything that requires an investigator to go in and look after the fact.
Does it start here at the top with the federal, and then the state looks at those guidelines and then comes up with their own? Or do the states have to adhere to a lot of what the federal has come up with?
Yeah, well, the states can come up with their own. They have that right. Okay. If they adopt the regulations, and they have to follow what they've adopted, how they put those in place. Yes.
Wow. Is the federal government ever overseeing all of this? Are they watching in some regards? Or once the state just comes up with the guidelines, these are the rules, this is what we're going with. We've used a couple of suggestions from federal. We think they work. And then they're off and running, and there's no scrutiny by the federal government.
Yeah. So whenever whatever the states adopt, okay, like I said, most of the states have adopted federal regulations and one either all of or a part of. When they do that, they get funding from the federal government. Okay, there's a
Okay.
funding called called a MIXAP grant, and so that's a part of the funding that they will get. And some of these states will actually do like federal investigations. So if they're working with an interstate carrier, then it becomes federal. So when someone goes and does a compliance review on an interstate carrier, they'll do it under the federal regulations for the federal government, even though it's a state um, company. Okay, so that's how that kind of works there. So with what you were saying there, one of the things that they do when they adopt, if the state can adopt the penalties, or they can set their own penalties, okay, for the regulations that are the deficiencies that they find. So it just depends on how the state, what they decide to adopt. A lot of states I've seen, they'll adopt federal regulations, but then they set their own state penalties, and whatever deficiencies that are discovered. There are some states out there that will take on the method of what the federal government does, which is a higher penalty status. Um, so it just kind of depends on each state on how they want to put those together.
When does the national get involved? Let's say there was an accident, and that would be, I guess, the NTSB would come into take a look at things, oversee, investigate.
Mhm.
At what level does federal get engaged with an accident?
Typically, the federal will get in on any interstate company. Okay, if it's an interstate involved accident, the feds have full control over that.
Hmm.
They may have their state partners come in and assist them with it. It just depends on who's available, but that's when the federal side comes into it. The feds regulate anything that's interstate commerce. Okay, drug and alcohol, CDL, and hazardous materials are the three that they will always oversee. Any placable amounts of hazmat. Okay, those will always be federally regulated.
Hmm.
So you know so most of the time the states handle their own, even if it is a interstate company, because there's only so many federal safety investigators. So they use the state partners to help them with those other cases that come up.
Give us some of and pick a random state or two, some of the guidelines that are out there that help protect the rest of us on the roads. Some of the
Wow,
rules, some of the regulations.
oh,
Yeah,
you, you know, I've been in many states to where uh, I've always been happy to see, just because I come from the federal side and the state side, but when they adopt all the regulations, it makes it, to me, it's a lot easier because you're following one book and not two separate
sure.
rules and regulations. Um, for example, uh, some certain states may require certain inspection stickers where some states don't. So there are some states that can be more stringent than others. You can't be, so to kind of answer that question, you can't be less stringent than what the federal government is. Okay.
Gotcha.
So if you're adopting the regulations, um, now you can set your own penalties and things, but you can't be any less than what the federal regs are. Okay. Um, and most states are like that. I mean, that's part of doing the funding and everything else. They have a strict, line to follow, because if they don't follow those, there are chances that, depending on circumstances, they could lose that funding. So they have to follow those guidelines pretty well, and that's all states. Some states, just give you an example, mud flaps. You know, those are a state regulation. Okay, not a federal regulation. Um, you also have like your dump trucks, just some everyday stuff you'll see that have the covers over the back of the dump.
Mm-hmm.
Those are usually municipality regulations, state regulations. Not every municipality or state requires that. There's been times, I just use that one just an example because it's very common. Uh, Folks would call in and complain when I was in the enforcement side and say, "Hey, going down the road, these rocks flew out, hit the front of my car. You know, there's nothing that they can do about it if there's not a rule in place for the fact that there's not a cover on there, just as an example.
Sure. How deep do they get? Let's go back to the mud flaps. When the
Yeah.
regulation is put in place, all right, the said vehicle must have mud flaps. Do they stipulate the size, the material? If it says something, can it say something? How deep do they get?
Yeah, each state has different regulations on the size of the mud flaps. Okay,
Wow.
there is a set size. I don't have that on top of my head here.
No, I
I
don't
should I
expect you. I
should
don't
know it.
expect you to because
But
it's very detailed. But I just wondered if
yeah,
they, if they're
yeah,
that
they're
picky, if you will.
sure. Even with now they have something out there. It's called wheels back. Um, with the vehicles that where their axles are set back towards the back of the trailer. Because of all these accidents, it's happened in the past years for rear end. The vehicles going underneath the trailer. So there's been set things where if you don't have wheels back, which is a set limit of where the axle's got to be before, so if the car goes under, it's going to hit the tires and not go all the way under without having a bumper. So there's different laws into that, and I'm just kind of being very general with that one. We can get very
Sure.
detailed with it, but there's just little things, and now something like that is being enforced more now than what it has in the past. It's always been a regulation, but obviously when things start happening, everybody starts paying attention to the rules and regs, and that's where the focus comes from.
Yeah, and I just bring that up to really illustrate how important this is, that it goes into detail. So if you're somebody that has a company that is a motor carrier company, transports all of this, that you got to make sure you're doing it right, because gosh forbid something were to happen. Now you're liable in terms of personal injury, lawsuits, but then fines from the municipalities and potentially even the federal government.
Mhm.
Right down to mud flaps. God, what if
Yeah,
something would have happened?
yeah. It's those little things when I'm teaching my classes. I always talk about uh, the trickle effect. It don't ever trickle down; it trickles up, and it's always those little things that you're not checking, you're not looking at that can cause, and
Yeah.
you trickles into something big. That's kind of how it goes. It seems like in the safety world, not everybody agrees with the safety regulations, with everything that's there, but they're there for a reason,
Hmm.
and you got to respect that. Um, it seems like the first thing some have overlooked in the past is the safety side. Um, but once you start seeing accidents and things accruing, then everybody's like, hey, we need to pay more attention to this. And the rules save lives, irregardless if we agree with them or not. Are there some out there that you just shake your head at and go, why is that a rule? But it's still a rule, and you got to follow them, like anything else.
Sure. I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's center on mud flaps for a second. It seems so, yeah, somewhat insignificant. It's important, but maybe not in the biggest regulation out there. What if a car was following a truck,
Mhm.
and the car actually had video recording software? Some of them do.
Okay. Hmm.
Truck in front of them doesn't have mud flaps. They're required.
Okay.
Big rock gets kicked up from one of the wheels in the back, goes through the windshield, hits the driver. Driver crashes. There's a death that occurs. It's actually on video. We see it on video. We saw where that rock came from, and there were no mud flaps. We can't say legally what's going to happen here, because that's in a court of law. But what is your feeling in terms of penalty or responsibility and all of that in a situation like that?
No, absolutely. First thing they're going to look at, and we'll just use the mud flaps as an example.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's mud flaps on there, what could that have prevented that incident? Possibly, right?
Hmm.
So does the state law say, hey, we require all commercial vehicles to have mud flaps? Well, what happened? It did not have any, so therefore we got a violation there, right?
Hmm.
And there's a deficiency. Um, so then what they would do, especially if there was a death involved or just an accident, period. Okay.
Sure.
It's going to get flagged. Someone will go in, either federal or state, depending on motor carrier, if you're what they are. Go and do an investigation on the safety part of it. Okay? They're going to look at that. So whatever they find with their investigation could be worse than just the mud flaps.
Mm.
See, so now it could trickle up. So now they're looking at everything because of something minor. It just created something large. So
Wow.
that's how that works. Now you got the feds. Let's say it is a federal case, okay, a federal investigation. You don't only have the penalties that are going to come down from what's found during the investigation. Now you also got to worry about the lawyers, the legal side of it, who gets involved outside, and that's where it gets very, very expensive. And you're looking at sometimes some of these cases are way up in the millions, depending on the incident, the circumstances, and who all gets involved. And it's not the federal government you got to worry about. It's all the other legalities and the lawyers and attorneys that get involved with that.
Mm.
That's what hurts a company for one little mistake that trickled into something pretty massive.
I see it, Matt. I see it clearly now as you're stating it. Because let's say that whole example of the mud flap situation.
Mhm.
What if that truck that didn't have the mud flaps had too much cargo, was weighed down too much? And so, a lawyer on the other side could say, well, because that vehicle was way overweight, it was able to push that rock up from the pavement, and that's why propelled the rock, and then it didn't hit the mud flap, and then there we go with the trickle down. The snowball down the hill just got massive from a
Yep.
a tiny little piece of ice, so to speak.
It happens all the time. When I'm doing my trainings and stuff, I think you and I've talked in the past about, talk about being complacent. I like to work with these drivers. Hey guys, this is what the rules are. This is what you're required to do each day. Your post and pre-trip inspection. Make sure you're doing these. Um, because again, you get complacent, the
Mm,
trickle effect could be caused. You're either you're rolling down with a big snowball, you're rolling uphill with, just worse and worse.
yeah.
And the only reason I use that analogy is because I've seen those things kind of happen. I've seen drivers go, it's just a light. Next thing you know, it's a brake. Next thing you know, it's a tire. Next, there's something in the road. It causes something, and then now you got an accident. Now you got, hopefully no one gets hurt. So there's so many circumstances that can do that. I'll give you a quick example on what you're just saying. Um, just an experience for me. Um, Doing an inspection on a company. We're talking about regulations here.
Hmm.
It was a propane truck. Propane's delivered in the winter most of the time here, at least here in the Midwest for heat.
Yep.
So, and I'm assuming on the East Coast as well. Um, but so we'd always do our inspections at the facility when they would come in, or before they go out. That way we got them running. Go in, look at the truck, walk around the truck, tell the guy, hey, my first mistake was I said, hey, everything's looking really good here. He's wanting to get what they call a CVSA sticker. Get a good inspection. He used to get a CVSA sticker. Okay? Shows they had a good inspection. Went to crawl underneath the truck. About done with it. As I'm getting to the end of the truck, I saw a crack in the frame member going all the way across the frame member.
Mm.
And I said, oh man, as I'm crawling out of the truck, and the driver heard me say that. He's like, wait a minute, you just said I had a good inspection. I said, well, crawl underneath here. I need to show you something. And he says, oh, wow. I said, well, we got to shut you down. You can't go nowhere because it was about a 6-inch crack going across that frame member.
Whoa.
And I asked him, I said, did you do your pre and post trip inspection like you're supposed to? He goes, Matt, to be honest with you, I came in late last night. I did not do it. He said, but I did hit a big old pothole in the road on my way home. And I heard this, and I said, is that a normal sound you'd hear? He said, no. He goes, I got in a rush and I forgot to do it. And I said, well, tell you what, you getting in a rush and not doing that safety check like you're supposed to do. Now you're out of service. I'm glad I stopped you because if you were going down the highway on an old gravel road like these trucks would go to, out in the farm fields and wherever else to fill up these propane, and you hit another pothole or something, or that would have cracked all the way, who knows what would have happened. And he
Wow.
stopped and looked at me, and then he turned around and he came up to me after he was upset he had to get a different vehicle, but he said, "Thank you." He said, "Matt, yeah, I know I'm wrong, but we saved a life today because anything could have happened." And we're looking at, 25-degree weather outside. It's cold. How metal works when it's cold, just like anything else. And so he thanked me. And I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
sorry I had to put you out of service, but it was the right thing to do today." So
Yeah. Yeah. And everything's life is a lesson. We're always learning.
yeah,
And that just shows the importance of the post-trip inspection. And I get it, you haul stuff, you're tired. I'll get to that tomorrow, first thing. And then,
yeah,
you're running late, got to get on the road, weather issue, whatever it is. But I'm totally seeing it, Matt, how the little things can turn into the big things, and those big things can lead to something catastrophic, even bigger.
yeah. Yeah, and that's to go back to our subject here with the federal regulations. That's why so many states and have adopted either all of or most of, because that gives them more power to look at the safety things on the vehicles. Now, each state's always had their own state statutes, but with them adopting these regulations and keeping it simple across the board, it makes a difference in how the enforcement looks at the safety of the motor carrier and the public.
Want to talk just for a moment here as we close today, how you work with these companies. Now, you're located in Kansas City, is that right?
Yeah, Overland Park. Yeah, Kansas City area. Yes.
Gotcha. You can do it virtually. Can you work with companies that way as well?
Yeah, sure can. We do training all the time virtually. We do safety analysis, which is kind of an audit on companies virtually. I always say anything that we do is always better in person, but we make it, we work out with whatever we can. Cost is always an issue, with these days, so we make it cost efficient for all of our customers.
This is a crazy question, final one I have, but I'm curious, with today's technology and video and such, has anybody ever taken you, let's say they wanted your thoughts on an inspection, but it was virtual. Like they took you through the vehicle with their phone and you said, all right, put the phone up there. I want to take a look at that. Give me the measurements of that kind of scenario. Has that ever happened?
It has.
Wow.
I work with registered inspectors. They're the ones who do the inspections on the cargo tanks. Okay. You see the numbers on the side of the tanks.
Yeah.
That's what those are. Those are inspection numbers, annual inspection numbers. Okay. So yeah, I've had many of my customers call me and say, "Hey, I got a problem here." So we'll get your phone out so I can see it. And then we can work through the problem sometimes. So yeah, we get that all the time. Or if anyone calls me, I'll say, "Can you send me a picture?"
Mm-hmm.
Because you need a visual to see what they're talking about. And then the next thing we'll say, "Hey, let's get the regulations out. Let's see what we can do here."
Amazing. Matt, great talking with you today.
Thank you.
I find it fascinating. And, we see these vehicles every day on the road. And now we know at least a piece of what goes into the safety behind it and what you do to help companies. How do we connect with you if somebody is a company that deals in transportation?
Yeah, you can give me a call at 573-416-8203. That's my direct number here. You can also find me at matt@dottrainingsolutions.com and on our website, dottrainingsolutions.com. All of our classes, everything's there. Just give us a call and we can do it with you.
Most important thing, safety first. And
exactly right. Thank you.
Appreciate you being here, Matt, and looking forward next time we get together.
Yes, sir. Talk to you later, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.